friends, welcome to My Sew Bliss. Today I'm going to be sharing 10 different issues you might have with your sewing machine or while you're sewing, and how you can fix them and make it even better and easier to sew and not as frustrating. Because I know sometimes, especially when you're new at sewing, it can get frustrating if something's not working correctly and you cannot figure out how to fix it. So hopefully we can cover one of the things for you and really help you along your way. So the main thing I want to emphasize, and that I always tell people, is if you're having an issue with your threading or your bobbin, or the stitching looks weird or something is being funky, the first thing I say to do is to rethread your machine. And even if you've already done it, I would say take everything out, start completely from the beginning and do it again. Because a lot of times you will miss like the looper on the top, or you might not slip into that tension disc the right way, making it so the tension's off, but it's not necessarily the dial, it's just because the thread isn't in the right position. So if you're having any issues, that is the first thing I would want you to look at, is making sure that your machine is threaded correctly. And if you need to, go to the manual and look at the manual and be like, okay, is it every little detail doing it correctly? Because there are some machines that want it a bit specifically to get it to work perfectly. So luckily machines nowadays aren't too hard to thread, but that's always the easiest fix. And even I have issues with that sometimes and have to do it. So that is the first thing I wanted to say. But for number one, I'll just go through my list of 10 things. If you start your stitching and you have what I like to call a bird's nest, especially right at the edge of the fabric, or the fabric gets stuck down in the throat plate, down here, the metal plate, or starts going in and the needle's just jamming it in and you're like, what is happening? Why is it so bad? So this middle thread right here, that's kind of what I'm talking about. When it just gets tangled up, doesn't look good. I mean, that's not bad actually. That usually I could pull out, but I've had a lot worse than that. And I'm like, why does it look so bad? So I always suggest have a piece of scrap fabric off to the side. Start in the middle of that scrap when you start to sew, and sew off of it and then onto your project without cutting your threads. So you always have a scrap of fabric to start on in the middle, so it'll hold those threads. It takes away all that bird nest that might happen, or tangled up threads that might happen. So I highly recommend you just always have a piece. And I had one, actually just threw it away. I'm kind of mad at myself because I was so proud of it, but it just got too thick. And I just had probably hundreds of stitches that I had started on it in all different directions. And it just kind of kept building up. It just kind of had a ton of threads. So I was like, no, I should probably like get a new scrap. But I just kept starting on that, and it just helps everything start sewing so much smoother and makes the process so much easier. And then you don't have any bunching, especially at the beginning or right on the edge of your fabric, or any of this tangled thread mess, which we want to avoid. So highly recommend starting with a piece of scrap fabric, and like I said, starting in the middle of that and then working off. Okay, number two, if you have skipped stitches, so you'll be stitching along and there'll just be like a whole stitch, one or two missing, and then it'll stitch along and then skip another stitch, and then it'll stitch along and skip another stitch. And this just doesn't look great. It doesn't look professional. So it can be quite annoying. It's also not a very strong stitch either. It's going to weaken your stitch. And this a lot of times is caused by a bad needle. Either it's a dull needle, it's the wrong type of needle. Your needle could even have just like a slight bend in it that could be causing an issue. Like not one you could actually tell, but it's just maybe it like got hit on something and has this slight jam. So try changing out your needle if you're having skipped stitches, or making sure you're using the correct needle for the project. Typically, for most projects, quilting cotton, you can use a universal needle, but if you're using any stretchy fabric, you want a stretch needle. Or if you're using denim, you want a denim needle, or a sharp needle for other projects. So it just depends on what project you're working on. But if you're having those kind of issues, it might just be an old needle that needs to be swapped out. Totally easy to change and put a new one in. For number 3, if your thread is breaking a lot, is it old thread? Have you had it for years and years and years and years and years? I'm not talking about like, not even 5 years. I feel like that's fine. I'm talking about like grandma's old thread that she's had for 50 years and then passed down to you. It could be wearing down and breaking, especially when it's going through a fast sewing machine, and that tension and the friction of it breaks that thread. It's just easier to break it. So make sure you're using a newer thread. There are very good high quality threads as well. I feel like you can get away with pretty basic thread. I've never had super bad issues with using like the regular thread that you would just buy at I want to say Joann's, but they're not there anymore. So at Michael's or any sewing store. So I've totally been fine with that. And especially, I think I talk about this later, but is it the right type of thread? So I usually just use a all-purpose thread, unless it's like quilting by hand or specialty top stitch quilting. And then it's a different kind of thread. But if you're just using basic all-purpose thread, that's going to work for most of your projects. So it might be time to switch out the thread if it keeps breaking. Okay, number 4 kind of goes back to what I said at the very beginning. If anything is jammed, rethread. If anything is skipping and you already changed the needle, rethread your machine. And also, don't just rethread the top of the machine, but also rethread the bottom of the machine, the bobbin. I think I said bottom and bobbin at the same time. Wow, tongue twister there. So make sure you're doing both, because that definitely can affect it. Also make sure that the bobbin is going the right direction. Some machines you have to make sure it's going counterclockwise, and some machines it doesn't matter. So keep in mind and know for your machine which direction that goes, and make sure it's wound correctly or placed in the machine correctly. Okay, number 5, if you're having any weird beeping, sometimes on this machine especially, I will accidentally, as I'm going for the handle, I will accidentally press a button right here, and it will change a setting, and then it won't let me sew, and I like didn't notice I pressed something. So you can, first of all, either cancel it out or turn the machine off and then back on again. Sometimes it just needs a reset, and that's okay. You just want to reset it to the original settings, and that will usually resets the beeping. I have had an issue where there was like a shortage in my presser foot, and when I took the machine in to get serviced, they were able to fix that issue. So sometimes you can't fix all the problems, but that is one of those things that if all else fails, try turning the machine off and on again. It's kind of like a computer. If like the computer is jammed and not working, it's like just turn it off and on again, and usually it starts working again. So that's a good thing to look at as well when you're using especially a computerized sewing machine. So keep that in mind. That leads me to number 6, which is make sure to do maintenance on your machine frequently. It's recommended, I want to say once a year. Do I always do that? No, but it is definitely helpful. It keeps your machine running smoothly. It gets oiled, things get tightened, because as you sew, it gets loose, or thread or lint gets inside the machine that we can't reach and clean ourselves. So this is a great way to make sure it's working correctly and ready to go. Okay, what are we on? 7. You're having bunching of your fabric, or maybe it's not laying flat, laying correctly. This can be either your presser foot pressure is pushing down too hard and it's not gliding through enough, like nicely, which this is only usually going to happen if you're using like really thick fabrics, or if you're using silky fabrics, or if you've messed with the presser foot pressure before. So if you haven't, I feel like this shouldn't be as big of an issue, but you could use a walking foot, especially when you're using thicker fabrics. A walking foot really helps everything move equally at the same time through the presser foot, because the feed dogs on the bottom are pulling your fabric through, and sometimes it just gets a little off. So if it's puckering too much, that's a good way to fix that. Also, just make sure when you're pulling it through or helping it through, you're not pulling too hard, because that can also cause some tension in your fabric and cause it to get bumpy or messed up. Okay, number 8. Like I said earlier, I don't mess with the tension a lot, if at all. I don't like to. I don't find any reason to, but if you have, make sure you set those back to the original settings. You can look in your manual and it will tell you what those settings should be for your machine, what the standard setting is, and try and stay on that as much as possible. Don't mess with the tension a lot unless you're using a specialty fabric that really needs it, or a specialty stitch that needs it, or you're listening to the manual and what it says. So for something like a serger, you have to change it, the tension for different stitches. But sewing machine, you don't do that a whole lot. So if you do, make sure that you set those back to the standard. That's going to make sure all your other stitching is going to look really good. Okay, we're almost to the end. Number 9. Is your bobbin wound correctly? Is the tension correct on your bobbin? So when you go and wind your bobbin, this one, I come around up and I go around through this loop right here, and then around here and go to the bobbin. And that helps hold the tension on my bobbin, or for my bobbin thread, so that it's threaded the correct tension and the correct amount. This one got over threaded, made the bobbin wonky, and now when I use it if I use it in my machine, the stitches aren't great. It doesn't look great, and that's all because when I threaded it, the tension was off. So make sure you are threading your bobbin correctly, and it doesn't get over threaded, or when it's on here, the thread is just going on the bobbin, not underneath it or around something else, because that's just, first of all, going to make a mess, and second of all, going to make the tension on your bobbin way off. Okay, and that also brings me to, if your thread is catching on, this is a spool holder right here. This, make sure this isn't going to fall off, but sometimes I've had spots where it will catch on that, or catch on the spool, or something wonky is catching it and holding the thread. So that when I'm stitching, especially if I'm doing something really quick, I'll be stitching and I don't notice that it's caught on something, and then the tension's off and I'm like, why are the stitches getting smaller? What is happening? It kind of starts making a funny noise, and then eventually it just breaks the thread, and I'm like, oh, that's what it was. It was getting caught and just held and not letting the thread through. So make sure there's nothing there, it's clean. The spool holder doesn't have like any grooves in it that are catching it, because like I said, I've had that happen quite a few times. I feel like, I don't know why. I think it's actually the spool of thread causing the issue, but just keep an eye on that. And yeah, those are a few of the things that I've had issues with and how I've learned to fix them. But I feel like if you keep your machine cleaned, oiled, and maintained, serviced, you can do some of that yourself, but do your yearly or every 2-year checkup with your machine dealer and keep your machine running nicely, it will work for you for years and years and years and be amazing. So I hope these tips helps you overcome any issues you might be having with your sewing machine. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions or if there's something I didn't cover, because I'm sure we all have different issues that come up with our sewing machine and different ways of fixing that, or need different advice. So thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more sewing tutorials, tips, tricks, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.